Hi.
Hello.
We are joined here with Nataraj today, who is one of our beautiful, beautiful teachers at our Mornington Studio, as well as the philosophy teacher on our teacher training. You're from New York, but you live here in Melbourne, Australia, and I'd love to hear a little bit more about you, what you do, your history, the clothes that you're wearing. Dive deep.
So I came to the tradition of yoga in a much different way than most people do. I came to yoga through mantra meditation, actually. So for my 12th birthday, a friend's mom gave me a present for my birthday, and it was a kit that came from like a bookstore. How retro. And it had a mala inside of it and a book that talked about the tradition of prayer beads throughout the world, throughout every culture, every spiritual tradition. There is this practice of reciting affirmations, prayers, mantras over beads. And in the book, it talked about the mantra Om Namah Shivaya, which the book translated to mean salutations to that which I'm capable of becoming. And so from the time I was 12, I started to do really intense mantra japa, or the repeating of mantra over a mala, which is like the yogic version of a rosary. And
at 12?
At 12. And that set in motion a series of very, very unusual and wonderful and surprising events. And eventually I found a yoga teacher who was the disciple of a great Indian yoga master, Swami Satchidananda, and his ashram, or his kind of yogic monastery, was located just a couple of hours away from where I grew up at the time, which was in Virginia. And so as a part of the teacher training, which I ended up taking when I was 15 years old, I started traveling to ashrams. And an ashram is just a place that's dedicated to the practice and study and embodiment of yoga. And it's usually overseen by a spiritual master or a kind of traditional set of teachings or practices. And it began a very, very deep dive down the rabbit hole of moving towards a life of inner yoga. And at several points in my life, I've taken various initiations or vows to live a life of yoga and to help disseminate this wisdom in a classical way. But I also have the benefit of being a modern person. And so I like to think about my life and my teaching practice, my spiritual practice too, as this ancient wisdom but modern living. And so one of the ways that I honor the rich tradition of yoga is by, when I hold the seat of the teacher, or when I engage with the traditional system of yoga, I dress in traditional attire. So it's customary for certain levels of initiates in India to dress a certain way. And so I dress in a customary way to honor the rich cultural and spiritual context of the yogic tradition. And at the level of initiation that I am, I've taken vows to wear white. So if you see me in the yoga studio in Mornington, I'm always wearing a white t-shirt at least.
Really?
Yeah,
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, and so when I engage with yogic practice, I always wear white. It's part of the deal, you know? And so when I go and teach in the philosophy portion of the program, the teacher training program, I'm always in white.
Yeah.
And so it's just, white is a color that has to deal with what's called sattva guna, and it means, it's like the most subtle, high vibe quality of nature that there is, which is purity. It means upliftment. It means expansion of consciousness. It means an ability to like see things as they really are, sattva guna. And so my life has been in pursuit of yoga in these what have become off the beaten path ways. But in a lot of ways, it's been a return to the traditional way that yoga was practiced a long time ago. And I've always had really amazing teachers who have an eye for kind of blending the ancient and the modern. And so I feel like I live kind of right at the crossroads, or right at the tension point between those two things. And so, you know, the name Nataraj, it wasn't my birth name, but it was a name that was bestowed upon me by my teachers. And the last name that I have, Chaitanya, it also denotes the level of initiation that I'm at in the traditional context that I'm in.
Right.
And so Nataraj is a form of the great Hindu deity, Shiva. When God dances, the world is destroyed or danced into being, and Shiva, as the cosmic dancer, is Nataraj or Nataraja. And Chaitanya means consciousness. And the tradition that I come from is a Shaivite tradition, meaning the philosophy of consciousness, or Shiva, is at its heart. And this name kind of points to what the tradition's all about, and so it was given to me by my teachers.
I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you, for me, embody yoga, right? And if you're lucky enough to be to one of your classes, you'll notice that, yes, you're not dressed like that. You're dressed in yoga outfit.
Yeah.
And, you know, we do the asana practice, we do postures, but you're really good at embodying what yoga is through philosophy, and through your whole classes, you're magically teaching the postures, but also it's just coming out of you naturally. And you don't even plan your classes, right? It just like flows. So do you want to talk more about that? I guess yoga for a lot of people is a physical practice. For you, it's become, I guess, potentially less of that, and there's more of an inner practice there.
Yeah.
So do you want to talk about that and the spiritual side of yoga?
Yeah, yoga, for me, it's a tradition where we learn to court grace. And so there's a large mystery that's going on here, and we're more than what we think we are. And what we need to wake up to that incredible, unimaginable possibility of what we are and what's going on here and what it's all about is we need wisdom. We need good ideas to have a change of heart, a change of perspective. And so one of the classic tantric texts called the Shiva Sutras, it says Gyanam Anam, which means knowledge or wisdom is food, it's nourishment. And yoga is a practice that's centered on unfolding that human potential. And what we need to grow is we need nourishment. We need good ideas. We need positive thoughts and emotions that lead to a sense of expansion. Because normally we are making decisions and choices from our tensions. Our fears, our anxieties, our frustrations, they keep us feeling limited and small in this world. We feel separate from life. And that's suffering from a yogic perspective, what they call dukkha. And this word dukkha, it comes from the root word kas, like akash, and it means space, and du means bad. So like normally we find ourselves in a bad space. We're in a bad space. And that perpetuates a narrative of separateness and smallness and limitation. When we come to a place of easeful openness, when we dissolve our tensions and receive everything in this life as nourishment, as food, we grow, we expand, we move towards oneness. And that's being in a good space, what the tradition calls sukha. And so the more we can be in that good space, the more we can feel ourselves in continuity with all the events of life. And so all the practices of yoga, whether they're physical, mental, emotional, or spiritual, they deal at moving us from a contracted or negative or dense state to a positive, uplifted, porous, loving state.
Yes.
And so my agenda that I'm always pushing as a yoga teacher is I want you to grow, and I want you to hear the most exalted ideas and concepts and practices that this tradition has to offer. And one of the great mistakes yoga philosophy says that a person can make is thinking that you're just a body, or you're just your thoughts, you're just the events of life that have happened to you. The tradition says you're actually something far greater, far more eternal, more creative, more powerful than you ever know. And to wake up to that, you need someone to hold the vision of your potential for you until you're ready to hold it yourself. And so I think any good yoga teacher, whether they're conscious of it or not, they're holding their students in a kind of loving consciousness state where they're saying, like, I believe you to be more than you think you are, and I believe you to be something incredible, something marvelous. And so we do practices and give teachings that allow the student to claim that realization as their own, where it's no longer just a thought or a physical practice, but you have this experiential knowledge that I'm more than what my thoughts say I am. I'm more than what society says I am. I'm more than what my tensions, my traumas, my anxiety tell me that I am. I'm infinite, I'm totality, I'm deathless, if we can even go that far. And that's what I feel very turned on by in the yogic practice. And so I try and open that door and, kick a few people down the rabbit hole that way as a yoga teacher.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I think that comes through in your classes, right? Like we're all in I like the saying, like, we're in some state of suffering, whether that suffering for you is frustration, fear, anxiety. Like, we all experience those emotions multiple times a day often.
Oh God, yeah.
And the physical practice obviously helps us move through that, but then there's a layer that you bring, which I think is so beautiful. So we hear often as a studio that, you know, some people potentially are not coming to yoga because they potentially see that it's linked to religion, or they've come from a background that they're not comfortable with potentially omming or, you know, hearing mantra or things like that in classes. Do you want to speak a little bit about yoga and religion? And huge topic.
Yeah, oh my God. So yoga is, as a philosophy, inherently theistic, which means that there is an idea of divinity or mystery or God, even though it's kind of a dirty word, a loaded word, at its heart. However, most people, when they think of the G word or they think about like religious or spiritual stuff, if you are averse to something like that, it's usually because you've been encountered or presented with really bad ideas, quite frankly, about what God is or what mystery is or what source is. And the yogic tradition is so accommodating and so welcoming and so compassionate. It presents a very, very broad idea about what divinity could be, how we could relate to it, how we might feel devotional toward it or engage with it. And in some of the earlier yogic texts, like the Yoga Sutra of Patanjali, the word that's used to denote God or the divine is called Ishvara. And Ishvara means the supreme controller. Now, if you have bad ideas about God, it's really easy to jump to there's like an old man in the sky who's doling out reward and punishment and judging me and saying like, you're tacky and I hate you, you know? And like, that's why I suffer.
Yeah.
Girl, no, that's not it. So at the time when this scripture was finally written down, there were already lots of different names for what God could be in India, where yoga comes from. We could call it Shiva, we could call it Ganesh, we could call it Krishna, or there's innumerable names. The sage Patanjali uses the word Ishvara as a nameless form of something more powerful than your limitations, to leave it vague on purpose so that you can cultivate a personal relationship with whatever you believe to be greater than you. Sure. And the tradition says that could have no form, what they call nirguna, or it could have form, which is saguna. And so a nirguna form of the divine could be, I believe that at the heart of this universe, love exists. Love doesn't have a form. It can express itself in form, but it's just like a wisdom virtue that could live at the heart of reality. It could be peace. It could be consciousness. It doesn't have a form, but it expresses itself in form out of its pure power and delight. Now, we're also relational beings. So healing happens in the context of relationships. You know, suffering happens in monologue, healing happens in dialogue. And so one of the yogic pathways that we could untangle ourselves from the habitualized ways that we suffer, i.e. get in our own head and run the monologue, is develop a relationship with the divine, whatever is bigger than your problems, okay? And so we could give it form. We could give God personality. And so we could say that saguna forms of God, they have mantras, they have attributes, they have myths and stories that we can relate to. Is the point that you relate to those things literally? No. The point is that they're guideposts for you to create loving, uplifting internal environments where you can recognize your own fullness. And so whether you believe in the divine as being formless or having form, the point is that it's in you. And so the spiritual path that's theistic in yoga, it reaches its culmination, its fullness, in a recognition that we are whatever we hold to be highest. And so it's you. Ultimately it's you, which is a big idea. And of course brings up a lot of resistance to all the ways that we believe it could not possibly be us. Yeah. But there are methods to overcome those limiting beliefs. So, you know, is yoga a religion? No, because it's not really codified. It presents a whole smorgasbord of possibilities that you might engage with to get you over your very unique constellation of tension that you've got in this birth. Is it spiritual? Yeah. Is all of you welcome on this path? 100%. And that includes even your ways of being contracted and stuck and angry and traumatized and whatever. Yoga philosophy gives us a framework in which we can work with and through and from where we are right now. And that means moving towards the divine, however we conceive it. So it's a compassionate path. It's an accommodating path. I think if you're a devout Christian and you come to yoga, you'll actually learn practices and philosophies that will make you a better Christian. I think if you're a Buddhist, you'll learn practices and philosophies that will make you a better Buddhist. If you're an atheist, you might wake up to a better idea of what's at the heart of reality. If you're, if you're not up for an adventure, don't come. It's not for you. It might not be for you yet, but
we should add that to the website.
It's not for everybody. It is. It'll meet you where you are, but you've got to want to be there.
Yeah.
And so if you're attached to your bad idea of God, or like the one that you were force-fed as a kid that fucked you up, I don't know if I can say that, but
you can say whatever you like.
Like that, then no, yoga won't pan out for you. There's a tension that has to be overcome. And usually yoga demands that we get off our bad trip. With all the places that we're averse or tense or have dualistic thinking, the yogic practice actually targets. So all your tensions, all your limitations, the moment you set foot on the path of yoga, all of those things have been given an eviction notice. And so their days are really numbered. And so it's about, in some ways, doing battle with those tensions, those habitualized ways of thinking and feeling, and moving towards that which is uplifting or more nourishing or puts us back into experience of our own wholeness. And that experience, that verb experience, is the sacred from the yogic tradition. It's a very long-winded way to touch on a very big topic.
No, it's fantastic. And, we were kind of talking about this a little bit off camera, like yoga meets you where you're at, right? So some people might be listening and being like, I didn't have that experience.
Yeah.
But that's because maybe they're not on that journey yet, right? Some people have been practicing yoga for years and still haven't had these experiences that we're talking about.
Yeah, and from God is inside like all of life's paradoxes, the yoga tradition says, which is, very interesting. And one of the things that we learn to be okay with is like we learn to be okay in the gray area or in uncertainty. And part of that is that the yoga tradition acknowledges that any way we deal with or relate to the finite, meaning like the world of matter, we also have the opportunity available to us to relate or know the infinite. And so the yogic tradition says that all of our choices, however misguided, however skillful or unskillful, are an attempt to find the sacred or find love. And sometimes we just go about it in really weird ways. Sometimes we don't even know we're looking for love. But every action you do, you essentially are saying, love me. You know? You're saying, like, I want to feel good. I want to expand. That love is always a movement towards oneness. And so maybe it's not even a conscious pursuit, but the tradition says you're looking for it, even if you don't know you're looking for it. And so when that search becomes conscious, that's when we've begun a process of inner yoga.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
So with yoga philosophy, how do you feel that helps people off the mat in life's challenges that we all have, different degrees?
Yeah, I think spiritual life, aka yoga, has to answer the very tough question, like, what do we do with life? Life is wild, it's unpredictable, it's sometimes painful, it's filled with uncertainty. Yogic philosophy gives us a framework in which we can contextualize the events of our life. Suffering we could think of like a tight crop of the mind. There's like a big picture, of course, but if we become focused on only one part of the picture, it's like a really tight crop. That's suffering. Yoga philosophy encourages us to expand our framework so that we can hold the vision of the big picture. And so the way it does that is it says everything in life is sadhana. Sadhana means practice. All of life is practice. There's no moment when you're not doing yoga. And so when you're on the spiritual path, everything that arises is an opportunity for growth, to experience love, to connect with whatever you hold to be highest or the divine, or it's a missed opportunity. And even when it's a missed opportunity, it's okay because life will continue to present you more and more opportunities. And so it gives us a compassionate way in which we can view ourselves and the experience of life. This idea that Ishvara became all of this, the divine, the mystery, the highest value became all of this. That means no matter what comes at you in life, the sacred has come to you in that form. And so how would you relate to your own suffering, your own confusion, your own heartache, if that was a form the sacred had taken? If the divine had come to you in the form of sorrow, what does that mean about the sorrow? Well, it means underneath that feeling, there's incredible wisdom, there's incredible grace, there's incredible nourishment for growth, if you hold it the right way.
Yeah.
And so the philosophy keeps saying like, hey, you're more than you think you are. And life loves us just as we are. It's why we're made the way we are, but it also loves us too much to allow us to remain as we are. And so we're being provided with a custom, bespoke sadhana or practice or series of experiences to go through that are perfect for our evolution.
Yes.
And at the same time, we're already it. So like, to come back to paradox, there is no escape and there's nothing to escape from. It's all you. But we're just building the ability to hold that.
Whew. Yeah. There's a lot in there.
It's a delightful mind tickle.
Yes.
It's like
mind tickle. I like your analogies. So as a yogi, we live, people listening, the yogis, how do we deal or how do we tackle like negative emotions and blocks that we feel, right?
Yeah. Okay. So the tradition that I come from, it's a non-dual tradition, which is what I've been speaking about. It means there's only one thing and we're all it, and it's the highest. The way that we can come to hold that realization is you have two choices initially. This is very simplified. The first is a path of neti neti. Neti neti means not this, not this. And the second is a path of iti iti. Iti iti means this, this. And so one is a path of negation and one is a path of affirmation. When we're first coming up against our own stuff, our own blocks, our own upsets.
I was going to say our own bullshit.
Yeah, our own bullshit. It's helpful to recognize that you are not that. That is not the sum total of who we are. And our English language can be very fooling sometimes because we say like, I am angry, as if the totality of who we are is anger. The reality of it is that it's something we have, it's not who we are. And so when you give yourself that inner world spaciousness to examine yourself and feel like this is something I have, it's not who I am, it gives you a more skillful way to deal with that. You're like, oh, well, I can let it go. Or I could do practice to dissolve that block. I can meet myself or the circumstance as it is without an over-identification. This path of neti neti also, it helps us identify with something bigger by saying the is it real test of yoga philosophy is, does this thing change? So if something changes, yoga says it's not the totality of who you are.
Do you have an example?
Yeah, so like our thoughts change all the time, our bodies are changing all the time, our moods, people, events, the ups and downs of life are always in motion. It's saying that's not the total of who you are. So we can contextualize suffering by saying we confuse the real for the unreal. Or if you confuse the temporary for the permanent. The Bhagavad Gita, it says, all that lives, lives forever. Only the shell, the perishable, passes away. The soul is without end, eternal, deathless. And so what you actually are is this like eternal energy. You are the very breath of life. You are the self, your consciousness, your loving awareness, and that's deathless. And so the neti neti path says, stop thinking that you're so small. Make movements to affirm that you're the highest, that you're eternal, that you're bigger than all your problems. And there are specific practices that address those tensions. Now the path of affirmation, iti iti, says whatever arises, you could also actively bring the awareness of yoga philosophy into daily life, which says like, oh yes, the beloved has come to me in the form of this. And that's a much more devotional, loving way to approach life's experiences. And it's an incredibly powerful one to eventually look back at one's own suffering and say, I am that too. You know, it made a seeker out of me. It made a yogi out of me. It was a catalyst for my growth. That, when you really own all your hardship and recognize that it made you much closer to being who you're meant to be, that's really powerful shit too.
Yeah.
You know? And so knowing when to use the right tool, neti neti or iti iti, is like a great yogic practice. Or you could think about any situation this way. Neti neti says take a step back, and iti iti says take a step in. So when you're in a tough moment, you could ask your inner world, you know, you could talk to your own mind, which is like a big realization for some people. Is life asking me to take a step back because it feels too hot, too urgent? Or is life asking me to lean in? Is this a moment to pull back and feel I'm not this? Or is life asking me to rise to the challenge and say, I'm all this? God bless this mess, you know, like, and give your grace to the whole catastrophe, give your grace to the whole creation. That's, you know, they both have utility, they both have power. You just need to know when to grab the right handle.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of my own shit.
Yeah.
And what I want to lean in and lean out of. I really like that analogy.
If you're thinking from limitation very often, you probably need more in your, like if you have thoughts that beat yourself up, if you attack yourself more often, I would say you need more neti neti in your practice, not this, not this. If other people are always the problem in your brain, it's usually life asking you to say, God's those incredibly annoying people too, you know? So you probably need more iti iti. And that's one of the ways you can learn.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, it's like see myself as divine or see the divine in other people.
Yes.
Yeah.
To finish up, last question, lucky last. What are some of the ways that we can live a life of yoga?
Figure out what your highest value is. What matters most to you in this life? And then try and feel it as often as you can. Live a life devoted to being in service of that highest value. Try and offer that experience to other people. So if what matters most to you is love, create an inner world where love can blossom naturally. And that means you need to think a certain kind of thoughts and feel a certain kind of emotions, and a way that you recognize, okay, are my thoughts in service of that love or do they pull me away from it? How do I recognize that love has come to me in the form of my life's trials and tribulations? How can I be a force of love in the universe for other people? Find out what that highest value is and contemplate regularly that exists inside of you in its fullness, and that you're called to offer that to other people. Right. And if you do that, you'll be able to weather life's trials. You'll have a kind of inner compass that will let you know what are the right moves to make and what are the moves that pull you away from love. That love is always going to be a movement towards oneness, which is what yoga means, you know? And so find whatever that highest value is and let it set your soul on fire. Yeah.
I love that. Would you mind sharing what your highest value is?
Yeah, it's devotion. Devotion. Yeah. So, you know, as someone who moved to New York in their early 20s, like, I have an incredibly good critical mind. And like, I came from a theater and dance background. I've always been in pursuit of human excellence. And that always means like fine-tune editing and refinements, and this is good and that's bad, and this is right and this is wrong. And devotion says everything's worthy, and everything's worthy of love and worthy of our attention and requires our care. And so connecting with a kind of personal, passionate presence in all things is what I'm really interested in. And then expanding that, living that, serving that, seeing it in everything. That's what I'm really after. Yeah.
What a beautiful way to finish. Thank you so much.
Yes.
Thank you. And I'm sure we're going to have more follow-up conversations because we've just almost tip of the iceberg in this conversation, right? Like just the beginning. So thank you so much.
Yes.